Ante la constante evolución, es esencial reaccionar a tiempo. No te limites a estar a la última. Ve un paso por delante con la plataforma de pagos unificada de Adyen. Adyen, negocios sin límites.
There's a future where you're in charge, where you look good and feel good and get what you want, no strings attached, where you cultivate interests, not interest, and you're free to go after the good stuff. Welcome to the future.
Buenos días a todos, buenas tardes y buenos días si nos saludáis desde Latinoamérica. Bienvenidos a la tercera jornada de Barcelona Fashion Summit. Como sabéis, esta edición de 2021 de Barcelona Fashion Summit se desarrolla a lo largo de 4 días, así que podríamos decir que ya hemos llegado al Ecuador. Ayer hablamos de aspectos como la sostenibilidad o el consumidor y hoy vamos a continuar hablando de drivers igual o más de importantes, como son la digitalización, el auge de la moda deportiva o la empresa familiar. Y también hablaremos de cómo el COVID ha cambiado el mapa geográfico de la industria de la moda. Como hemos tenido en los 2 días anteriores, contaremos también con un panel de expertos que conectará al final de cada intervención para hacer preguntas, pero, como ya os hemos dicho, os animamos a hacer las vuestras, las podéis dejar en el chat y tanto a Inés como a mí nos las irán pasando para que se las formulemos a los ponentes. Sin más, doy paso a Inés para que presente al primer ponente del día.
Muchas gracias, Pilar. Sí, buenas tardes a todos. Os presento. La primera ponencia del día correrá a cargo de Matt Powell, vicepresidente y Senior Industry Advisor de the NPD Group. Cuenta con más de 40 años de experiencia en el sector de la investigación y también es colaborador habitual de los principales medios de comunicación como experto en estudio del consumidor. Antes de unirse a NPD en 2014, Powell ocupó cargos en Model Sporting Goods, MVP.com, Sportsmart y Sneaker Stadium. Welcome, Matt. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Go ahead.
You ready? All right, let's see here. Can you see my screen? Yes, good. Just a little bit on me. I have been in the retail business for nearly 50 years. I've been doing research on the sports market for more than 20 now, and I've been within the NPD Group for 6.5 years. I'm doing these kinds of presentations several times a week, and I'm very happy to be with you today. We're going to take a look at some top-line trends that are happening in the U.S. market, and then we're going to take a deeper dive into athletic footwear. As you can see here, the sports equipment business has actually been quite robust even during the pandemic. People are, I think, more concerned about healthy lifestyles and healthy living than they perhaps were before the pandemic. As we saw the gyms close, the home fitness business took off, the bicycle business took off, and then later the team sports business really centered around golf did quite well. Alternatively, though, the apparel and footwear businesses have not been good here in the U.S., with the fashion side of footwear and apparel much worse than the athletic side. We'll take another look at a chart on that in a second. We've closed a significant number of retail stores. This is all retail now, not just sports retail. We've closed a significant number of retail stores in the United States this year. About 9,000, and projections in 21 are that we're going to close another 10,000 doors. The U.S. is far too overstored. We have far too much retail real estate for the number of people that we have living here, and we frankly have too many stores selling the same stuff. So while this is extremely painful, it's very, very necessary. This is the chart I referred to earlier. This illustrates the rolling 12-month trend for athletic footwear in green on the left versus fashion footwear in blue, and active apparel in green on the right versus fashion apparel in blue. And up until recently, I used to say that these two categories really moved in concert with each other, that if one went down, the other one went down, or if one went up, the other one went up. But the athletic side always outperformed. And this is really until we got to COVID. And once we got into the middle of this pandemic, the bottom absolutely dropped out on the fashion footwear and fashion apparel business. For the year, fashion footwear is down about a third, just to put it in perspective. And we see that we have moved to one wardrobe. If you go back 10 or 15 years, we had a wardrobe for work, and we had a wardrobe for weekend, and we had a wardrobe for working out, maybe a wardrobe for special occasion. And now that's all merged into one, and it's athleisure, it's activewear. We don't see this situation reversing itself post-pandemic. DTC business is extremely important, mostly online. Here you can see some of the top brands and how much they've grown, in the green bar being their online DTC business, and very often at the expense of their wholesale partners as well. We did a survey early on in the pandemic and asked consumers what they did before the pandemic, what they intended to do during the pandemic, and what they expected to do after. And you can see that many people are thinking about exercising more, whether it's walking and running, whether it's yoga, whether it's bicycling. And we think this bodes well for the sports industry as we move through time. This is another interesting chart that's taken by our partner Civic Science, asking about people's exercise trends. And before the pandemic, more people said they never exercised at all than said they exercised several times a week. As we got into the pandemic, those numbers reversed themselves. And now more people say they're going to exercise several times a week versus those who don't exercise at all. And we think this trend continues, and that this is very good for the sports apparel and footwear business. We also did another survey with Civic Science and asked people what they plan to do, and in terms of change in their exercise behavior. 48% of adults now plan to do more hiking and walking than they had in pre-pandemic. And all of these other exercises, fitness areas are going to see an uptick as well. Women tend to favor hiking and walking, at-home fitness, and men favored more outdoor sports, golf and running. But again, expectation is that all of these categories will show an increased participation on the part of the consumer. Gym attendance is down. People are still expressing concern about going back to crowded gyms. And I think with the surge that we've seen in home fitness, that people are going to be reluctant to go back to the gym, even though they're interested in fitness. And then finally, online, and this is another massive shift that we've seen. Every category that we measure is showing a big jump in online purchasing. In 2019 in the United States, about 29% of all athletic footwear was purchased online. In 2020, that moved to 40%. In activewear in 2019 was about 20%. That's moved to 35%. And we think that people have learned new behaviors here under COVID that they are not going to unlearn once we begin to come out of the pandemic. This chart illustrates another way to look at it. This is comparing the growth rates of physical stores versus online stores only for, again, athletic footwear on the left and activewear on the right. And you can see that even as we opened up stores in May, June, and through the second half of the year, the online business continued to grow at a very fast pace, and the brick and mortar business never really got back to positive. So again, we think that this illustrates that people are not going to go back to their old behaviors. So let's take a look at what's happening in athletic footwear. It's been a real roller coaster ride for athletic footwear in the United States. The business in April down 50%, the single worst month I have ever seen in the 20 plus years I've been doing research. June up 27, the single best month I've ever seen in 20 plus years. It's been a wild ride. Overall, overall, you want to see that the athletic specialty and sporting goods channel performed better than all the other channels, department stores and shoe chains. And overall sales for the year down 6%, but average selling prices are up 5%. And the consumer continues to tell us that they are willing to spend more money if they see value in the product. And I think the good news here is if we can hold on to this increase in average selling price and begin to reduce the decline in units, there should be an opportunity to get some nice leverage here. Major categories, sport, leisure, performance, and outdoor all showed declines. The work category was up a little bit. When we look at it by brand, the interesting story here is that the brands that were underperforming the market pre-COVID continued to underperform the market during COVID, and the brands that were overperforming the market pre-COVID continued to do so during COVID. All the trends are worse than they were for the most part, but it's really interesting that the relationship to the marketplace didn't really change much for these brands. Nike sales down a little bit, but better than the market. The Jordan sales were up, although all of that came in the first half. The second half of the year, Jordan sales are actually down. Adidas did not have a good year in the U.S., sales down in the mid-teens. Skechers activewear the same. New Balance improved as we move through time. Brooks, interestingly, has done quite well. And I believe that they are sort of a leading indicator that we are going to see performance running footwear come back into fashion. Performance running footwear in the United States has not been considered streetwear for about 8 years now. So this will be a major change for the industry. I'm not going to read all of these, but the running brands all improved as we move through time, including Under Armour. Puma had a very, very good year, all on fashion footwear. So a real interesting story of how the business shook out by brand. By category, the biggest losses came in sport, leisure, and in performance basketball. The only growth we saw were in small categories like golf and slides. Walking shoes had a good fourth quarter. The basketball business continues to be in free fall here. It's down 23% for the year so far. This is performance basketball only, and it only represents 3% of sales. And we used to think of basketball as a really important category for the U.S. sneaker business, and it's really becoming not nearly as important as we go through time. What is working, though, are basketball-inspired footwear. Jordan retro product, shoes like Air Force One, continue to do very, very well. So it's a real mixed bag for basketball out there. The running category down 5, but again, in the second half, outperformed the market. Nike continues to lose share in running, as does Adidas. Brooks is taking share here. And I want to call out Hoka and On, two brands that frankly operated as if there was no pandemic at all. They put up just startling increases this year. And again, I think they're an early indicator that we're going to see performance running footwear as streetwear make a return. We can see here, this is what we look like on a weekly trend level for road running and trail running. And both of those were solid. The track and field business was challenged, mostly because many schools canceled their sports seasons. Women's performed better than men's during the pandemic, and I think that we can expect that to happen as well. And then finally, when we look at it by wearer segment, men's and women's down mid-single digits, kids down high single digits. The fact that we didn't really have a back to school here in the United States, which is always a prime selling period, hurt the kids' business. I think demographics are working against us there as well. I don't expect the kids' business to return to significant growth in the near term. And this is an interesting one. We ask our consumer panel, you bought a pair of sports shoes, what do you intend to do with them? And only about 14% of people who bought a sports shoe said they intended to do sport in those shoes. I don't think this argues against my theory that we're going to see a return of interest in health and fitness. I think what this really indicates and supports is my theory of one wardrobe, that people are buying athletic footwear for everything today, every social occasion, and sport is only a small part of that. So here are my predictions for the year, and then we can open it up for questions. I think consumers are going to be very slow to return to malls. Every survey we're seeing indicates that while malls have opened, in some states, people are not going back, rushing back, and I think people are still concerned about going into malls. That's going to drive even more business to e-commerce. I think that we can expect e-commerce to reset at a new higher level. I think also the growth of brand direct-to-consumer, mostly being driven by e-commerce, will continue to help this trend as well. I think there will be an emphasis on healthy living, as I've said a couple of times, and I think ultimately that bodes well for the sneaker business and for the athleisure business. I think that the stimulus checks did not really help. We saw a couple of weeks of growth there. I think that it's going to be a very lumpy sales trend for the year. I think that we will be very easy to offset that down 50 that we saw in April. It's going to be impossible to offset that up 27 that we saw in June. So it's going to continue to be a roller coaster ride for business. I expect that athletic footwear for the year will be up in the low single digits, above 2020 levels, but not to 2019 levels. I don't think we get back to 2019 levels until 22. I think a similar situation for athleisure. Again, better than 20, but not as good as 19. I think the home fitness business will remain strong. I think that activities that I can do to stay fit and remain socially distant will continue to be good. So that's going to support golf and tennis. It's going to support running and hiking, and some water sports, bicycling and so forth. So all in, it's going to be just a fair year for the sports business in the U.S. And that concludes my prepared remarks. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Very much, Matt. As you said, let's move on to the Q&A section. Pasamos al turno de preguntas, como siempre, con el panel de expertos. Permitidme presentaros a los dos expertos que nos acompañarán esta tarde. Tenemos con nosotros a Enrique Porta, socio responsable de consumo y distribución de KPMG, y Gonzalo Brujó, que recientemente ha sido nombrado presidente global del grupo Interbrand. Buenas tardes y bienvenidos los dos. ¿Qué tal? ¿Alguien se anima a empezar?
I'm sorry, I didn't get all the part. I apologize.
They're going to ask you some questions, Matt.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Since we are the expert, Matt, so more than happy to be in touch with you and participate in these fantastic sessions. So I would like to ask you something. As you said before, right now we are seeing that there is the behaviors of the consumer. That's one wardrobe that has everything. So in one hand, you have the sportwear mixed with the fashion, and what we see is the sportwear is performing much better than fashion. So the sport brands are doing better in this regard. What they can do, the fashion brands, in order to overcome this change of habits. How they can start moving forward and change this trend.
So I think I got that. I think the fashion brands really have to move to more athletic looks. We certainly have seen that with, for instance, here in the U.S., the brand Cole that used to be known as a men's leather dress shoe business, and they essentially have turned themselves into a sneaker brand at this point. They still have the Cole sensibility, I think, to the product, but consumers, I think, want light and comfortable and breathable products, and so stiff leather shoes that really connote the dress shoe business are just not appropriate. So I think brands have to begin to make that shift.
Thank you. No te tenemos, no sé si...
Oh, sorry.
Now.
You can hear me now? Yeah, sorry. I was saying what they can do, the fashion brands, because they are struggling to pass to the sport world. So what they can do, which are the levers they can use to become more relevant in this space?
Well, I think again, adopting the attributes of athletic footwear, I think it'd be a first step. So how do I make my shoes lighter? How do I make the footbed more comfortable? How do I make the shoe more breathable? Can I bring athletic colors into the mix and not just do brown and black, which is the bulk of what the dress casual business is? How can I align myself with celebrities who have a voice in the athletic space? I think all of those are incremental steps that brands can make, and so I think that's really the key: is how do I find a voice for myself in the gap between athletic and fashion.
Another question.
Thank you, Matt. I think this is quite interesting. I'm very keen on the data that you show, and it's interesting to see that some of the brands did their homework. Some of the brands are quite relevant for the customers in general. Again, you mentioned the retro work of Jordan, also the positioning and the new strategy of Brooks as well as Puma. Those three brands are really moving along well besides COVID. So that means that maybe some of I think would be a good moment for 2021. And I want to see your point of view to rethink the position of the brands, the strategy of the brands, to try to make sure that they can, grow stronger in 2021 and beyond. What is your point of view here?
I think, thank you. I think that we really need to see brands focusing on what the U.S. market is asking for. One of the points that we were making pre-COVID, and I think we've seen it continue under COVID, is that the consumer is really in charge today of what fashion says. It's not up to a designer or a celebrity or a brand to say, this is what's in fashion, you need to buy it. That's the way we used to do things. Today, the consumer is telling us what they want. And so I think brands have got to be really closely listening to the consumer and bringing products to them that they really are looking for. I think also the consumer is looking for practical purchases. Again, I think they're going to be focused on fitness and health. So how do I align myself with that side of it? And then finally, the retro business continues to be a very important driver out there for fashion. And part of Puma's success was retro. All of Jordan's success is retro. And I think the consumer is saying, I want to go back to a time when it was safer and simpler and not so contentious. And I think retro product delivers that for them as well. So I would advise brands to make sure they're giving a strong emphasis to the retro side of the fashion equation.
Thank you, Matt. We have some... Oh, Gonzalo.
No, in terms of return investment, what kind of recommendations you have to give for fashion brands to keep the business alive? It's about more marketing investment. It is more about product design. It is more about focusing only online versus retail. It is about healthy lifestyle, focus on the way to design their products. Any specific, again, if you would need to give 3 recommendations for a startup company, what would be your advice?
Well, honestly, I think all of that. I don't know that it's just one thing. I think brands have to be working on several different levels with it. But bottom line, look, I'm a product guy. I've always been a product guy. So it comes down to having the right product, the product the consumer wants to buy, and that's listening to the consumer and understanding that. But I really think all the elements that you described have to be part of the equation.
Thank you.
That it's increasing, which are the relationship between or the agreements between brands and the fashion with brands in the sport or designers. So do you think it's something that will be growing in the coming years, or we see more and more these kind of collaborations in order to fill the gap between the both worlds?
I think that the collaborations between two brands really is the intent of the brands to bring their consumers, their fans, to the other brand, and I think it's a valid approach. Unfortunately, most of those collaborations really are not made in commercial numbers. The releases are always quite small to try to build hype, to try to build excitement, and because of that, they really don't have a major commercial impact. What I would like to see brands do is figure out a way to take those collaborations and keep them special and small, but then figure out a way to broaden that into the market so that they can take a color or a design element or an accessory or something that made that product desirable and make it more commercial. I think we're missing a big opportunity there to leverage what is the significant commercial potential in some of these programs.
Thank you, Matt. We have some questions from the audience as well. Let's answer some of them. Hi, Matt. Thanks for such an insightful presentation. What are your predictions about Athleisure on the long run?
I really think that we are going to be in a permanent state of athleisure. I don't see us going back to dressing more formally after COVID. I think people who've been working from home have been dressing very comfortably, and I think they're going to want to continue to do that. I do think athleisure will change over time. Whether it's moving from hoodies to crew necks, moving from one type of bottom to a different type. But I think athleisure will remain the dominant fashion story over time.
Thank you. A second question: for a company like Zara, is it possible to compete with Nike?
Well, look, honestly, no. I mean, Nike is so big today; they can do anything they want to do, and so I think brands have got to figure out a path that takes them away from that. It's really interesting, though. Just as an example, I wrote about this the other day. Brooks Running Company is now the #2 women's performance running brand in the United States. And if the trajectories of the business continue with Nike declining and Brooks increasing, Brooks is probably going to pass Nike as the #1 women's performance running shoe brand in the United States this year. Lululemon is going to be the #1 women's activewear brand in the United States at some point in the near future. So there are ways, I think, to chip away at Nike, but to go out and say I'm going to be the next Nike, I don't think that's really in the cards.
Thank you. Another question: sportswear is here to stay, or will it fade away with COVID-19?
I really think it's here to stay. I think we may see young consumers going out and buying a suit or a dress for an occasion once we start to emerge from the pandemic. But I think when they choose their everyday wear, they're going to continue to choose athleisure.
Yesterday, someone talked about Nike. What do you think about direct-to-consumer strategy?
The direct-to-consumer strategy, I think it's exactly the right way to go. I think every brand really needs to evaluate that. There is no retail partner that a brand can count on to present their products the way they intended. The only place where a brand's total message on their product it can be presented is in their own website. There's more profit there, and they're controlling the pricing. They're controlling the way the product is presented. At the same time, though, there always will be multi-brand stores out there. I don't think we go to 100% DTC, but clearly there's major runway for brands today to grow the direct-to-consumer business, and I think every brand needs to be pushing as hard as they can on that.
Thank you. Let's go back to Gonzalo and Enrique. Una segunda ronda de preguntas.
I don't know. Perhaps I can take in this idea of direct to consumer. We have seen in your figures that athletic brands or sport brands are performing better in e-commerce than the fashion ones. So probably it will be an advantage for them. What do you think? And also, perhaps they can use this presence in e-commerce in order to build a more personal or personal proposal to the consumers. So.
Yeah, well, I think the athletic brands have been participating in e-commerce a lot longer than most of the fashion brands have. I think from the very beginning they realized the potential there, and have changed their marketing so that it's virtually all social media at this point. So I think they've just had a really good head start. But I think the fashion brands can look to what the athletic brands have done and begin to grab some of those ideas and apply it to their own businesses. I think there's a big opportunity for them in that realm. So I think social media is the only way to talk to the consumer today, and I think every brand has got to be very focused on that.
Thank you, Matt. I have 100 shops, retail shops. What I should do with them? Close 50, close 100, go towards having only a single or two flagship stores. What would be your mixed strategy that would you apply on this specific matter?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I want to layer one other thing on top of that. Here in the United States, we've seen a major exodus of people from cities into to other places where they can work from home, and the cost of living is much lower. So what used to be an A mall and pre-COVID may not be that A mall post-COVID, and what was a C or B mall may move up the ladder because of this migration that we're seeing. I think every retailer, whether on the branded side or on the retail side, needs to be evaluating their fleet of stores every year and paring off the bottom 10, 15, 20% of stores, whatever they can afford to do. It makes the remaining stores, the remaining entity, more profitable, and I think makes them a stronger retailer. So, and look, some of this is going to be forced on us. We're here in the U.S., we're going to see malls closed in 2021. And so even if a retailer might have had a successful store in that mall, they may find that they need to have to shut it down because the mall is shutting down. So things are very, very much in flux. But I really think that a smart retailer is saying, what are my worst performing stores on an annual basis, and making decisions to shut them down. I didn't hear your audio, sorry. I'm not hearing you.
Hear me now, Matt?
Yes, now I got you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Enrique, una última pregunta.
Yeah, probably talking about personalization, because we are seeing more and more this direct to consumer, trend. More and more consumers want to have what they want in the moment that they want, in the shape that they want, and the color. So how the brands need to go into personalization, how far they can go in this path, and it will be necessary or not for being successful. What do you think?
Well, certainly every brand is working on some kind of personalization techniques out there. But interestingly, I can't get anybody to tell me how big a part of their business it is, which tells me it's probably not that big. If it was great and when it was growing, I think we'd be hearing people talking about how sensational their personalization business is. So, but I do think the consumer continues to want to find unique products. I think they want products that are made just for me. And so I think there is a need to continue to offer personalized products. But I would tell you, so far, I don't think it's been a major a boon to the business.
Thank you very much, Matt. Muchas gracias, Enrique y Gonzalo, por vuestras preguntas y muchas gracias por las preguntas que habéis hecho desde casa. Nos vemos con el panel de expertos en la siguiente ponencia. Thank you very much for joining us today, Matt. It's been very interesting. Hacemos la primera pausa del día y volvemos puntuales a las 5 menos 10 con Lina Mascaro. Os esperamos.
Ante la constante evolución, es esencial reaccionar a tiempo. No te limites a estar a la última. Ve un paso por delante con la plataforma de pagos unificada de Adyen. Adyen, negocios sin límites.
There's a future where you're in charge, where you look good and feel good and get what you want, no strings attached, where you cultivate interests, not interest, and you're free to go after the good stuff. Welcome to the future.